The day I went from being just another new neighbor to the most hated guy in Lakeside Estates was the exact same day I found my power. $500. That's the fine they slapped on me, just for fishing with my daughter. What the HOA didn't realize was I had the money, the time, and the stubbornness to fight back. And trust me, I was ready to use all of it. Now, if you're watching this on your phone, maybe hiding out in the bathroom to escape one of those boring HOA meetings, drop a comment and tell me where you're hiding. Because this story, it's one you'll want to hear until the end. My name's Remy Thornfra. Up until a couple months ago, I was living what most people call the dream. I spent 15 years working in venture capital, investing in small tech startups, flipping them for big money. And by 42, I had enough to walk away. Retired early. I thought that meant I had it all. But life has a way of reminding you, money isn't everything. Last year, I lost my wife, Rachel, to cancer. It was brutal. Left me raising our 14-year-old daughter, Solon, on my own. Grief almost tore us both apart. The only thing that seemed to bring her even a little bit of peace was fishing. That was something the three of us used to do together, back before Rachel got really sick. So when I decided we needed a fresh start, I looked for a home near water. Somewhere calm, somewhere safe, somewhere we could heal. Lakeside Estates looked perfect. Big houses, good schools, and right in the middle, a gorgeous 6-acre lake. Yeah. The realtor mentioned there was a homeowners association, but she brushed it off. Said it was just normal HOA stuff. Lawns, house paint colors, nothing major. She did hesitate a little, though, before adding, "Oh, and the HOA president, Karen Wellington. She's very dedicated to keeping up property value." I didn't think much of it. I'd dealt with tough personalities my whole career. How bad could one neighborhood lady really be? Well, I found out. It was a quiet Saturday morning in April. Solon and I had been fishing off the little dock for about an hour. First time in weeks I'd seen her smile, really smile. She'd just pulled in her second bluegill, carefully unhooking it, when a sharp voice cut through the air. "Excuse me, what exactly do you think you're doing?" Walking up to us was a woman in her late 50s. Perfectly styled blonde hair, expensive workout clothes, tablet in hand, and that look, the kind that makes you feel like you're in trouble before you even know why. "Good morning," I said, keeping my voice friendly. "Just fishing with my daughter." I held out my hand. "I'm Remy Thornfra. We just moved into the Sycamore Drive house a couple months ago." She ignored my hand completely. Instead, she tapped on her tablet and said in this stiff, formal tone, "Mr. Thornfra, fishing is strictly prohibited in our community lake. This is a direct violation of HOA rules. I'm Karen Wellington, HOA president." And then, like she was announcing a royal decree, she added, "I'll have to issue a violation notice. The fine is $500. I felt Solon freeze next to me. "There must be some mistake," I told her calmly. The realtor actually mentioned fishing as one of the community perks. It was part of why we chose this place. Karen gave a thin smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "That regulation was updated last month. All residents were notified by email. Ignorance of the rules doesn't excuse breaking them." She spun her tablet around, showing me a document. At the top, Amendment to Recreational Use of Community Lake, dated 4 weeks earlier. "We never got any notice," I protested. "Oh, the email was sent," she said firmly. "Maybe you should check your spam folder, but it's not my responsibility if residents don't read official communication." My jaw tightened, but I stayed calm. Why was fishing suddenly banned? The lake is clearly stocked. I pointed at the water where bass were swimming just beneath the surface. Karen glanced at our fishing poles like they were dirty trash. "Environmental and safety concerns. Hooks injure wildlife, and some residents don't like the smell of fish or bait while they're enjoying the lake views from their patios." Her tone, her whole attitude, it wasn't just about rules. She looked at our little tackle box like it offended her existence. "We're careful," I told her. "We catch and release. We clean everything up." Her face hardened. "Mr. Thornfra, perhaps you don't understand how things work here at Lakeside Estates. We keep a certain standard. This is not a public fishing hole. Longtime residents expect a particular atmosphere. Newcomers sometimes struggle to adapt." She looked at Solon, then back at me. The implication was crystal clear. I bit my tongue. I wanted to fire back, but then I heard a soft sniffle. Solon had tears in her eyes. This lake was supposed to be our place of healing, and now this woman was ruining it with her smug rules. "We'll pack up," I said quietly, putting an arm around my daughter. "Please just email me the fine and the updated rules." Karen's smile came back. A victorious one. "Excellent. Glad we understand each other. Do check your email more carefully, Mr. Thornfra. We wouldn't want any more misunderstandings." And with that, she spun on her heel and walked away. her designer sneakers barely making a sound on the manicured grass. Solon wiped her eyes as we packed up. "Dad, why was that lady so mean? We weren't hurting anything." I didn't have a good answer. Not one that was fit for a 14-year-old anyway. "Some people," I told her softly, "care more about rules than they do about people. Let's go home, kiddo." That afternoon, after we got home, I checked my email. I even dug through the spam folder. Nothing. No notice about any fishing ban. That's when I started digging deeper into this HOA, and what I found changed everything. Turns out, Karen Wellington had been HOA president for 8 years straight. Her day job? She owned a fancy little real estate company that specialized in luxury neighborhoods, just like ours. Scrolling through her social media, I saw something that made my blood boil. Dozens of photos of her hosting lakeside parties. Loud music, catered food, even alcohol. All right there at the same lake she fined me $500 for fishing at with my kid. Apparently, those environmental concerns didn't apply when she was the one using the lake. But the most important thing I found was buried deep in the HOA documents. The lake? It wasn't actually owned by the HOA. Nope. It belonged to the original developer, Meridian Development Corporation. The HOA only had a lease to use it for 30 years, and that lease? It was set to expire in less than 2 months. That night, I stood at my window, looking out toward the lake, and who did I see? Karen. Laughing with a group of friends at the gazebo, wine glasses in hand, like she owned the place. I muttered to myself, "All right, they want to play games with rules? Then I'll play too. But first, I need to find out who really owns that water." The next morning, I got lucky. While out front, I ran into an older gentleman walking his dog. He introduced himself as Merrick Henderson, a retired lawyer who lived a few doors down. When I mentioned Karen's little fishing fine, his friendly face immediately turned sour. "Ah," he said, shaking his head. "You've met our neighborhood dictator. Let me guess. She hit you with some obscure rule and slapped you with a fine?" I nodded. "Yep," Merrick sighed. "She's been running this place like her personal kingdom for years. Most folks just pay the fines and keep their heads down." He lowered his voice, glancing around. "But if you want the full story, come by for coffee later. I've got plenty of HOA horror stories to share." I accepted. That afternoon, sitting in his cozy living room surrounded by law books and old photographs, Merrick laid it all out. He showed me a folder of documents he'd collected over the years. "The lake isn't really HOA property," he explained. "It's still owned by Meridian. The HOA only leases it. But look here." He pointed to a highlighted date on one document. "That lease runs out in about 60 days. At that point, Meridian can either renew it, sell it to the HOA, or sell it to someone else entirely." I leaned forward. "So what happens if they sell?" "Then whoever buys it makes the rules," Merrick said flatly. "And between you and me, I've heard whispers that Meridian's strapped for cash. They might be looking to unload assets quickly. And Karen? She knows it." We dug deeper, pulling up public records. And slowly, a disturbing pattern began to appear. Through different shell companies, all linked back to her real estate business, Karen had been quietly buying up properties in the neighborhood. How? By drowning homeowners in HOA fines until they had no choice but to sell. Then one of her companies would swoop in, buy the place cheap, fix it up just a little, and flip it for a massive profit. And now? Her eyes were set on the lake. Merrick leaned back in his chair with a grim look. "She's been in private talks with Meridian. Not to buy the lake for the HOA. Oh no. For her own company. Once she gets it, she plans to cut back lake access and build luxury homes on the shoreline. That's why fishing got banned out of nowhere. She's already preparing to lock this place down." I sat there in silence for a moment, anger rising in my chest. This wasn't just about fishing anymore. This was about power, greed, and control, and I wasn't about to let her win. Not long after, Merrick introduced me to another neighbor who had also butted heads with Karen, Samuel Washington. Samuel was a retired banker in his 60s, sharp as ever, always dressed like he had a meeting with the mayor. He welcomed us into his study one evening. And that's when I realized Karen's games ran deeper than I thought. Samuel had been keeping records, detailed spreadsheets of every HOA violation, every fine, every so-called enforcement over the last decade. And the numbers? They told a story. "Look here," Samuel said, scrolling through his files. "Homeowners of color got violations at almost 3 times the rate of their white neighbors. New families, people like you, always got targeted first. And when those families sold at below market prices, guess who ended up buying those homes through shell companies?" He pulled up property records. Every trail led back to Karen's web of LLCs. Different names, different fronts, but all tied to her. 6 homes. Same pattern. Fine after fine. Value dropped, family pressured out, Karen's companies buying them up cheap, then reselling for a profit. Merrick shook his head. And now the lake is her golden goose. She's setting herself up to cash in big. Meridian's in financial trouble and she knows it. If she can grab the lake, she'll turn it into high-end lots and pocket millions. Samuel nodded grimly. She's not enforcing rules for the community. She's running a business, off the backs of her neighbors. I sat back in my chair, trying to take it all in. I'd thought this was just a petty HOA fine. But no, it was bigger. Karen had turned the whole association into her personal empire, and she wasn't going to stop. Over the next few weeks, Merrick started arranging quiet little meetings with other frustrated residents. Sometimes we met in Samuel's house, other times at the library or even the back room of a friendly neighbor's bakery. People started opening up, sharing their own run-ins with Karen. A retired teacher said he'd been fined for too many Christmas lights, the day after he spoke against Karen at a council meeting. A foster mom said her kids were banned from the community pool for being too loud, even though Karen's grandkids were twice as noisy. A young widow told us Karen led a random inspection through her yard, then hit her with 5 violations for stuff every neighbor had. But somehow, only she got cited. Story after story. All the same pattern. Karen singled people out, pressured them, and either forced them to comply or pushed them out. And you know what? Instead of breaking us down, her bullying just brought us together. Samuel set up a private messaging group, and more neighbors joined in. It was like a quiet resistance forming right under her nose. Meanwhile, I started digging into Karen's personal finances. And here's the kicker. For someone who loved acting rich, she was drowning in debt. She had taken out loan after loan, maxing out her properties just to keep her empire running. The lake project wasn't just her next big payday. It was her lifeline. If she didn't get it, she was done. That made her dangerous. But it also made her vulnerable, and I was ready to use that. With every new piece of information, things became clearer. This wasn't just about one fishing fine anymore. Karen had built an entire empire on intimidation, shady deals, and squeezing her neighbors dry. But here's the thing. She wasn't untouchable. At one of our late-night meetings, Samuel leaned in and said, "We can't just push back randomly. If we want to beat Karen, we have to time this perfectly." "Let her dig her own hole first," Merrick agreed. "The more she commits to this lake project, the more vulnerable she'll be when the truth comes out." And that made sense to me. I wasn't some rookie. I'd spent years in venture capital, buying distressed assets, flipping companies when they were about to collapse. I knew opportunity when I saw it. And this lake? It was the opportunity of a lifetime. That's when Samuel introduced me to another ally, Robert Chen, a real estate broker who knew the local market inside and out. We met at a coffee shop across town, far away from lakeside estates. Robert didn't waste time. Karen's been trying to scrape together financing to buy the lake for around $300 grand. But Meridian? They're broke. They need fast cash. If someone came in with a better offer, especially cash up front, they'd take it in a heartbeat. I leaned back, letting that sink in. I had the resources. I could buy the lake right out from under her. But Robert wasn't finished. And between you and me, Karen's whole business is smoke and mirrors. She's leveraged up to her eyeballs. She needs this deal just to keep her creditors quiet. Without it, she's toast. That was the moment I made my decision. I wasn't just going to fight Karen on rules. I was going to pull the rug out from under her entire plan. The strategy was simple. Wait until she committed. Make my move quietly, and then reveal it at the perfect moment. In the meantime, though Karen must have sensed I was digging around, because suddenly, the violations started rolling in one after another. Improper weed. Control. Mailbox too tall. Garage door the wrong shade of beige. Even landscaping materials I hadn't touched since moving in somehow became unauthorized. Within 2 weeks, I had racked up almost $2,000 in fines. When I tried to appeal, the paperwork mysteriously got lost every time, and it wasn't just me. Anyone seen hanging out with our little group became a target. Maria, the foster mom, got dinged for her lawn being a 1/4 inch too tall. James, the retired teacher, got fined for a bird feeder he'd had for a decade. Diana, the young widow, got written up because her recycling bin was too close to the garage. It was obvious. Karen was running a campaign of intimidation. She thought if she hit us hard enough, we'd scatter. But she miscalculated. Because the more she pushed, the more neighbors joined us. Every ridiculous violation was another recruit for our quiet resistance. By the 3rd week, nearly a third of the community was on our side. And then, it got personal. One afternoon, my daughter came home in tears. Kids at school were calling us troublemakers, saying we were ruining property values. Turns out one of the moms, one of Karen's close allies, had been spreading rumors about us. That night, after Solon was asleep, I called Merrick. Maybe we should just sell the house and move. This is too much for her. He was quiet for a second, then said firmly, "That's exactly what Karen wants. She's done it before. At least 6 families I know of. She hounds them until they sell cheap, then her people buy the homes. Don't give her the satisfaction." And he was right. Walking away would be letting her win. And worse, it would teach my daughter that bullies get what they want. No, I wasn't leaving. It was time to make my move. That night, after deciding I wasn't backing down, I sat at my desk and went through the HOA documents one more time. And that's when I found something that made me smile. Karen's big plan. Her special assessment to raise money for lake improvements? Yeah, she'd told everyone it only needed a simple majority to pass. But the fine print said otherwise. It actually required 75% homeowner approval. She'd been lying to her own community, confident no one would notice. That was the final push I needed. The very next morning, I pulled out the funds. $350,000, about 15% more than Karen had offered for the lake. Samuel even pitched in another 50 grand to make sure we had leverage. Within 48 hours, I had signed the papers with Meridian Development. The lake, all 6 acres of it, plus the 10-foot shoreline perimeter, was mine. Not the HOA's, not Karen's. Mine. And the timing couldn't have been sweeter. Because the very next day, Karen had scheduled a big HOA meeting. She was going to unveil her vision for the future of the lake. She even hired an architecture firm to make fancy renderings of her dream project. From the preview I'd seen, it included shrinking the lake by nearly 20% to make room for a private members-only lounge, conveniently placed right where the best fishing spots were. I didn't say a word. Only Merrick and Samuel knew what I'd done. Meanwhile, Karen turned up the pressure. She called an emergency HOA session and announced a new monthly fee, $50 from every household, supposedly for lake maintenance. In reality, it was just her way of building a war chest to buy property she no longer had a chance of getting. At that meeting, she strutted up to the podium with a PowerPoint called Elevating Lakeside Estates, a Premier Vision. For 20 minutes, she talked about how her grand reimagining of the lake would increase property values and bring prestige to the community. What she didn't mention? That her company would be the one developing and selling those lakefront homes. And just to twist the knife, she also took the chance to smear me. Without saying my name, of course. She talked about certain new residents who didn't understand community values, about financially unstable individuals trying to drag down property worth. Samuel tried to stand up for me, but Karen humiliated him in front of everyone. She brought up an old tax issue from years ago, completely resolved, and made it sound like he was some kind of cheat. It was a cheap shot, but that's how Karen operated. Then she turned her sights on Sapphira Duskland, a quiet florist who timidly suggested maybe the whole community should vote before making such big changes. Karen fixed her with this icy glare and said, "Sapphira, isn't your flower shop lease up soon? It would be a shame if there were any complications with that." The threat was obvious, and Sapphira sat right back down. As I watched Karen bully her way through that meeting, I felt a strange calm, because what she didn't know was that her entire plan had already crumbled. The lake she was bragging about, it wasn't hers to sell. It wasn't even Meridian's anymore. It was mine, and soon, everyone was going to find out. Karen had no idea the ground was already gone under her feet. She kept pushing harder, desperate to hold on to control. First, she leaned on her political connections. Out of nowhere, city inspectors started showing up at my house. Suddenly, my deck needed structural review. Old renovations, done by the previous owner years ago, were flagged for permit issues. Even the mayor's office, where Karen's buddy held influence, started asking questions. It was obvious. She was using every tool she had to scare me off, and I'll admit, it almost worked. Especially the day Solon came home crying for the 3rd time in 2 weeks. Kids at school were calling us names, saying we were ruining the neighborhood. I almost packed up that night. But then the call came. Meridian's lawyer confirmed the deal. The lake was officially mine. Karen's exclusive negotiation rights? Gone. Her dream project? Dead before it even started. The very next day, she showed up at my door, face tight with rage. "What did you do?" she snapped. "I know you've been talking to Meridian. Did you sabotage my deal?" I gave her my calmest smile. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Karen. But I did hear the lake was sold. I sure hope the HOA gets along with the new owner." Her eyes narrowed. This isn't over. The HOA has rights. Whoever bought that lake can't change access without us approving it. I raised an eyebrow. You might want to double-check that agreement. From what I understand, it expires in less than 30 days. And renewal? That's up to the property owner. Her face went pale for just a second before she recovered. The community won't stand for this. We'll sue. Good luck with that, I said, still smiling as I closed the door. From that point on, she spiraled. Emergency board meetings, closed-door sessions with her allies, whisper campaigns with the mayor. She was desperate to figure out who the mystery buyer was, but I stayed quiet. Then came her big move. A massive lakeside party. Catered food, live music, wine bars on each end of the lake. But only original homeowners were invited. Newer residents, like me, were pointedly excluded. That's when I knew it was time. I had already filed the paperwork to terminate the HOA's use agreement early, citing their failure to maintain water quality. Legally, I was in the clear, and with the party in full swing, about 60 residents laughing and drinking by the water, I walked right into the center of it all. Merrick and Samuel were with me, so was my lawyer. And just to make sure things didn't get out of hand, I brought along a local police officer I'd already briefed. Karen was on the microphone, mid-speech, when I calmly stepped forward and took it from her. "Good afternoon, everyone," I said. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Karen rushed over, hissing through her teeth. "This is a private event. You weren't invited." I held onto the mic. "Actually, Karen, I think there's been a little mix-up. Because the truth is, this isn't your lake anymore." I pulled out the deed and held it up high for everyone to see. As of 3 days ago, I am the legal owner of this lake and the surrounding shoreline, which means, technically, all of you are trespassing right now. The crowd went silent. Karen's face flushed bright red. "You can't do this. The HOA has rights." "No, Karen," I said calmly. "Meridian had rights, and now I do. And since the HOA has already violated maintenance terms, I've terminated your agreement early." Effective immediately, I gestured to the police officer. "You all have 15 minutes to gather your things and leave. Officer Reynolds is here to make sure that happens peacefully." For once, Karen had no words. She just stood there, stunned, as the residents started packing up in angry confusion. Some shot me curious looks, but more than a few gave Karen glares sharp enough to cut glass. One older gentleman walked past me and whispered, "About time someone stood up to her." As the crowd thinned, I felt something shift. For the first time since moving into Lakeside Estates, I wasn't the one on the defensive, Karen was, and I knew this was only the beginning. After that party, everything changed. The very next week I had private property and no trespassing signs installed around the lake. I even hired a small security team to patrol the shoreline. For the first time, the place wasn't under Karen's thumb. It was under mine. But I didn't stop there. I called a local newspaper and held a small press conference. Reporters gathered by the dock as I explained what I planned for the lake. "This place has been neglected for years," I said, showing them the water tests I'd already commissioned. High phosphates, algae growth, stressed fish populations. The HOA claimed they cared about the environment, but they never actually did anything. That changes now. We're turning this into a conservation space, a place where kids can learn about ecology and sustainable fishing. At first, reactions were mixed. Some residents were upset about losing access. But then, details of Karen's secret plan leaked out. The one where she wanted to drain part of the lake and build private luxury homes. And just like that, the tide began to turn. People started asking themselves, was Karen really working for the community? Or just herself? Karen, meanwhile, went ballistic. She tried everything. Lawsuits claiming I was destroying community value. Emergency board votes to fine me into submission. Even pushing the mayor to stir up zoning challenges. Every attempt collapsed. The property deed was airtight, and the old use agreement was dead. The more she flailed, the weaker she looked. Then came the turning point. At a heated HOA meeting, Sapphira, the timid florist Karen once threatened, finally stood up. Her voice shook at first, but she pushed through. "I've been on this board for 3 years," she said, "and I've watched Karen twist rules, target families, and spend our funds on projects that only help her friends. $80,000 last year on the North Park. A park that only serves 10 homes, all of them owned by her allies. Meanwhile, basic playground upgrades for the main park were denied." Gasps filled the room. For the first time, people were openly questioning Karen in public. And once the first domino fell, the rest followed fast. One by one, longtime residents spoke up. Complaints that had been whispered for years came pouring out. A motion was introduced to audit HOA finances. Faces that used to nod along with Karen now looked suspicious, even angry. The fortress she had built around herself? It was crumbling, and she knew it. So I decided to give things a little push. At the next community event, I made an announcement. Starting this week, kids from Lakeside Estates can get free fishing passes for Rachel's Lake. One catch, though children of current HOA board members won't qualify until their parents step down. Petty? Maybe. Effective? Absolutely. Within days, some of Karen's staunchest allies, the same people who had cheered her on against me, were suddenly reconsidering their positions. Parents who had backed her blindly were now knocking on my door, asking how to get their kids involved. And one by one, the cracks in her support widened. Karen was losing control, and for the first time in years, Lakeside Estates was beginning to breathe again. The more control Karen lost, the more desperate she became. First, she tried rumors. She spread whispers that the lake was polluted, that fishing there was dangerous. But that fell apart fast when I published official water test results, showing the lake was actually cleaner under my care than it had ever been under the HOA. Then she tried bribery. One evening, Merrick called me over, grinning like a kid at Christmas. He'd recorded a private conversation with Karen. On the tape, her voice was crystal clear. "I can make all those violation notices disappear, Merrick. And once the new board is in place, there'll be a spot for you too. With a stipend, of course. All you need to do is convince Remy to sell the lake back. Scare him if you have to. Talk about liabilities, insurance costs. Make him nervous." I couldn't help but laugh when Merrick hit pause. "She forgot the first rule of being a villain," he said. "Never try to bribe a retired ethics attorney." But Karen wasn't done. Late one night, my security cameras caught her sneaking onto the property with 2 other board members. They crouched by the shoreline, pouring something from a bottle into the water, trying to contaminate it. That was the last straw. I handed the footage straight to the police. Karen was arrested for trespassing and attempted environmental tampering, and once investigators started pulling threads, more of her mess unraveled. Misuse of HOA funds, shady property deals, evidence that she had intentionally driven down property values to scoop up homes through her shell companies. Her empire wasn't just cracking anymore, it was collapsing. 2 weeks later, I hosted a meeting at my home, and this time, everyone was invited. Except the current HOA board. Nearly the entire neighborhood showed up. Families crammed into my living room, standing along the walls, waiting to hear what came next. I laid it out simply. The lake is secure. But this community, it needs fixing too. I'll transfer the lake into a community trust, but only under 3 conditions. 1. The HOA leadership must be completely restructured, with term limits and transparent elections. 2. Every rule and regulation will be reviewed to make sure it's fair and equal. And 3. An independent ethics committee made up of rotating residents will oversee all decisions going forward. Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. People were nodding, smiling, hopeful for the first time in years. Then I revealed my final card. Some of you may not know this, but over the past month, I've also been buying mortgage notes through Lakeside National Bank. About 20% of the homes here, including Karen Wellington's. The room gasped. "I don't plan on foreclosing," I assured them. "In fact, I'll offer refinancing at lower than market rates to anyone interested. But first, this broken system has to change. No more bullying. No more corruption. It ends tonight." When the vote was called, it wasn't even close. The decision to remove Karen and her board was nearly unanimous. For the first time, Karen Wellington had been stripped of power, and this time, she wasn't coming back. Once the community voted her out, Karen's downfall moved fast. The police charges for trespassing and tampering were just the beginning. Investigators dug deeper into her finances and found years of shady deals. Misused HOA funds, selective enforcement, and even evidence of her shell companies snapping up undervalued homes. Civil lawsuits followed. Families she had forced out came back with lawyers, demanding payback. Her real estate company, once her pride and joy, collapsed under the weight of audits and investigations. Within months, Karen had no choice but to put her own house on the market. But with her reputation in ruins, nobody wanted to buy. Meanwhile, Lakeside Estates finally felt different. Lighter. Sapphira, the florist who once backed down under Karen's threats, was elected as the new HOA president. She promised transparency, fair rules, and term limits. For the first time, people actually believed the HOA could work for everyone, not just the powerful few. And the lake? It was renamed Rachel's Lake, in honor of my late wife. I handed ownership over to the new community trust, with legal safeguards, to make sure it could never again be sold off or abused. It would stay open for everyone. Forever. 3 months later, we hosted the first community fishing day. Families filled the shoreline, kids laughing, parents talking, neighbors reconnecting after years of tension. That evening, after everyone left, Solon and I sat on the dock together, watching the sunset dance across the water. She leaned against my shoulder and whispered, "Mom would be really proud of you, Dad." I swallowed hard and smiled. I think she'd be proud of both of us. A year later, our little neighborhood had become a model. Other communities started copying our new rules. Even the mayor who once backed Karen quietly stepped down, his reputation dragged down by their connection. As for me, I was asked to run for mayor. I turned it down. That wasn't the kind of power I wanted. Instead, I set up a scholarship in Rachel's name, for kids who had lost a parent to cancer. Because in the end, the real victory wasn't about beating Karen. It was about changing the rules of the game so no one like her could ever use them to hurt people again. And if you're listening to this while fighting your own HOA nightmare, remember this. Bullies only win if you play by their rules. Sometimes the best move is to rewrite the rules entirely.